Happy Shabua'uat! Shabua'uat and the wheat harvest is a scriptural journey through feast, firstfruits, and fulfilled promise. What is Shabua'uat? Is it just about counting weeks? Or is it about an alignment with Yahuwah's calendar, covenant offerings, and one of the times when divine promises get fulfilled? Today we'll walk through the scriptural origins of Shabua'uat, the Feast of Weeks, its connection to the wheat harvest, and how on this very feast the Comforter was sent just as Yahusha said, and how prophecy itself burst into reality. First we'll look at the name of the feast and its timing. In Abari, which is to say, Hebrew, Shabua'uat means weeks. After the Feast of Matzah, 7 Sabbaths are counted, and then 50 days are counted after that. The 50th day is the Feast of Weeks, known as Shabua'uat. Shabua'uat was translated as Pentecost in Greek, which is the Greek word for 50th. This countdown begins when the sickle touches the grain. Regarding grain harvests, the barley harvest comes first, and Shabua'uat celebrates the completion of the wheat harvest. In terms of the agricultural context, barley is cut in early spring. Wheat ripens later in the season. Shabua'uat stands as the closing celebration of the grain harvest. Exodus 34 verse 22 calls it the Feast of Weeks, the firstfruits of the wheat harvest. Deuteronomy 16 begins its count with the sickle strike. So when Israelites brought 2 loaves baked from new wheat flour, they weren't just offering bread, they were offering gratitude, aligning themselves with timing, and demonstrating trust. Leviticus 23 and Numbers 28 assign Shabua'uat a set-apart convocation, with grain offerings and priestly activities. This wasn't symbolic, it was commanded and consecrated. As a pilgrimage feast, Shabua'uat was one of the 3 pilgrimage feasts, alongside Passover, known as Passover, and Tabernacles. Israelites gathered to present themselves before Yahuwah, as noted in 2 Chronicles 8 verse 13. This explains why, in Acts 2, there were devout men from every nation under heaven dwelling in Jerusalem. They had come for Shabua'uat, the Feast of Weeks, just as generations before them had done. The city was filled with worshippers, pilgrims, and seekers. So when the Ruach HaKodesh, meaning set-apart spirit, was poured out, it wasn't in a quiet corner. It was in the heart of a feast, among multitudes gathered in obedience to the command given centuries earlier. It's called the Feast of Harvest in Exodus 23, an agricultural culmination, a spiritual dedication. Shabua'uat reminds us of a promise fulfilled. In John 14, verse 16, Yahusha says, "And I will ask the Father, and he shall give you another Comforter, to stay with you forever." That Comforter, the Ruach HaKodesh, meaning set-apart spirit, was sent on the day of Shabua'uat. Acts 2 verses 1 to 4 records it. When the day of Shabua'uat, that is, Pentecost, was fully come, they were all filled with the set-apart spirit. The timing wasn't incidental, it was intentional. The feast that honored firstfruits became the day Yahusha's promise bore fruit. And Kappa, known as Peter, stood, quoting from you all, that is Joel, "This is that which was spoken by the prophet Joel. I will pour out my spirit upon all flesh." On this day, this feast, prophecy was not just remembered, it was fulfilled. Shabua'uat was not only the culmination of the wheat harvest, it was the beginning of the spiritual harvest foretold long ago. And Sha'ul, known as Paul, he honored this feast too. In 1 Corinthians 16 verse 8, he writes to the believers in Corinth, "I will tarry in Ephesus until Pentecost." That's Shabua'uat, the Feast of Weeks, and the fact that he mentions it so plainly tells us something important. These weren't just Yahudim believers, they were Gentiles believers too. Yet Sha'ul didn't need to explain what Shabua'uat was. Why? Because the early believers were familiar with the feast. It wasn't a foreign concept. It was part of their shared rhythm, a time they recognized, respected, and anticipated. This shows us that Shabua'uat wasn't just a feast for Old Testament believers. It was a feast for all who followed the way. Sha'ul's travel plans revolved around it. His ministry aligned with it. And in Acts 20 verse 16, we see him hurrying to be in Jerusalem, known as Jerusalem, for Shabua'uat, knowing the city would be filled with people, a divine opportunity to proclaim the message. The wheat harvest may have ended, but the harvest of souls was just beginning. So when we speak of Shabua'uat today, we're not reaching back into someone else's calendar. We're stepping into a feast that was honored by Yahusha, fulfilled in Acts 2, and observed by Sha'ul, a feast for believers then and now. As a conclusion, Shabua'uat stands at the intersection of covenant, agriculture, and spiritual awakening. It teaches us about the culmination of the grain harvest season and gratitude, promise, and provision. And there's more. Shabua'uat doesn't just point backward to harvest and covenant. It points forward to prophecy and judgment. In Matthew 13, Yahusha shares the parable of the wheat and the tares. A man plants good seed in his field, but an enemy plants tares among the wheat. At harvest time, the tares are gathered first and cast into the fire. Then the wheat is gathered into the barn, into Yahusha's storehouse. This isn't just a farming metaphor. Yahusha explains it plainly. The harvest is the end of the age, and the reapers are angels. The wheat represents the children of the kingdom. The tares are the children of the wicked one, and are removed first. Then the righteous are gathered. And what harvest does he use to describe this final separation? Wheat, the very crop celebrated at Shabua'uat, the very season when the firstfruits were offered, the very feast when the Spirit was poured out. So Shabua'uat becomes a prophetic mirror, a feast of wheat, a feast of firstfruits, and a feast that foreshadows the final harvest. It reminds us that the gathering isn't just agricultural, it's eternal. From the fields of wheat to the hearts ignited in Jerusalem, known as Jerusalem, this feast reminds us Yahuwah's timing matters, and every prophecy and promise will be fulfilled in His time, based on His calendar and on His appointed feast days. On Shabua'uat, the Comforter came, just as Yahusha promised, and fulfillment of you all's prophecy of Yahuwah pouring out His Spirit on all flesh was confirmed.